A millionaire CEO strolls through the park and freezes when his eyes fall on his divorced wife, laughing with a little boy. The shock hits him like lightning. The child is the mirror image of her, carrying the same smile, the same spark. Questions erupt in his mind like thunder. Could this secret child be his? Or has she built a life he was never meant to know? She was pushing a swing when he saw her, laughing at something the little girl whispered, and when the child turned around, David's world stopped, because those were Isabella's eyes staring back at him from a face that could have been his own. She was pushing a swing when he saw her, laughing at something the little girl whispered, and when the child turned around, David's world stopped, because those were Isabella's eyes staring back at him from a face that could have been his own. The morning had started like any other for David Chen. Black coffee, financial reports, and the familiar weight of his Armani suit, armor against a world that demanded nothing less than perfection. At 38, he'd built Chen Industries from the ground up, transforming a small tech startup into a billion-dollar empire. The corner office of his Manhattan high-rise offered a view that most men would kill for, but today it felt like a prison. His assistant Monica had been suggesting he take a break for months. "You haven't taken a real day off in 3 years, Mr. Chen," she'd said just yesterday, her voice carrying that motherly concern that made him uncomfortable. Success had its price, and David had been paying it gladly, until recently, when the victories started feeling hollow and the silence in his penthouse apartment grew deafening. That's what brought him to Central Park on this crisp October morning, walking aimlessly among the joggers and dog walkers, feeling like a stranger in his own city. The autumn leaves crunched beneath his Italian leather shoes, a sound that reminded him of simpler times, before board meetings and acquisition deals consumed his every waking moment. What do you think drives successful people to lose sight of what truly matters? Share your thoughts below. Meanwhile, 15 blocks away, Isabella Martinez was braiding her daughter's hair in their small but cozy apartment. At 35, she possessed the kind of natural beauty that no amount of expensive makeup could replicate. Warm brown eyes that held both strength and sadness, and a smile that could light up the darkest room. But this morning, worry lines creased her forehead as she watched her 5-year-old daughter, Emma, bounce excitedly by the window. "Mommy, can we go to the park today, please? Mrs. Henderson said the leaves are perfect for collecting." Emma's enthusiasm was infectious, her gap-toothed grin impossible to resist. Isabella's heart clenched. Emma had been asking about her father more frequently lately, innocent questions that cut deeper than any blade. "Why don't I have a daddy like Sophie?" Or, "Do you think my daddy would like to swing with me?" Each question was a reminder of the secret Isabella carried, the truth she'd been too afraid and too proud to reveal. "Of course, mi amor," Isabella whispered, kissing the top of Emma's head. The little girl smelled like strawberry shampoo and possibility, a combination that never failed to make Isabella's chest tight with love and fear in equal measure. As they walked to the park, Emma's small hand tucked safely in hers, Isabella found herself scanning the crowds out of habit, a reflex born from 5 years of both hoping and dreading she might see a familiar face. She'd chosen this neighborhood specifically because it was far from the financial district, far from the world David inhabited. But fate, it seemed, had other plans. The playground was alive with the sounds of childhood. Squeals of delight, the rhythmic creaking of swings, and parents calling out warnings and encouragement. Isabella settled onto a bench while Emma ran toward the slides, her pigtails bouncing with each step. For a moment, Isabella allowed herself to relax, to simply be a mother watching her child play. "Higher, Mommy! Push me higher!" Emma called from the swing, her legs pumping with determination. Isabella laughed, rising to push the swing when she felt eyes on her. It was that peculiar sensation of being watched, the kind that makes your skin prickle with awareness. She turned, her hand still on the swing's chain, and her breath caught in her throat. There, standing 30 feet away beneath a golden maple tree, was David. He looked exactly the same and completely different all at once, still devastatingly handsome in that sharp, controlled way that had first caught his attention in college. But there were new lines around his eyes, a weariness that his expensive suit couldn't hide. Their eyes met across the playground, and for a moment time seemed suspended. 5 years of separation, of carefully constructed walls and deliberate silence, crumbled in an instant. Isabella's heart hammered against her ribs as she watched recognition dawn on his face, followed quickly by confusion, then something that might have been longing. But it was Emma's voice that shattered the moment. "Mommy, who is that man? Why is he looking at us like that?" David's legs moved without his permission, carrying him across the playground like a man in a trance. Each step brought Isabella's face into sharper focus. Those eyes that had haunted his dreams, the curve of her smile that he'd tried to forget through countless 18-hour workdays. But it was the child who held his attention now, the little girl whose features were an impossible blend of familiar and foreign. "Isabella!" Her name fell from his lips like a prayer he'd forgotten how to say. She stood frozen beside the swing, her hand still gripping the chain so tightly her knuckles had gone white. "David!" The word was barely a whisper, carried away by the autumn breeze that scattered leaves around their feet. Emma looked between them with the unfiltered curiosity of childhood, her swing coming to a gentle stop. "Do you know my mommy?" she asked David, tilting her head in a way that made his chest constrict painfully. Up close, the resemblance was undeniable. The child had Isabella's warm brown eyes and delicate bone structure, but there was something else. The stubborn set of her jaw, the way she held her shoulders, even the slight dimple in her left cheek when she smiled. Features that David recognized because he saw them every morning in his bathroom mirror. David's voice caught. He was a man who commanded boardrooms, who had negotiated billion-dollar deals without breaking a sweat, but faced with this moment, words abandoned him entirely. Isabella stepped protectively closer to Emma, her maternal instincts overriding the shock of seeing her ex-husband after 5 years of silence. "Emma, sweetheart, why don't you go play on the monkey bars for a few minutes? Stay where I can see you." "But Mommy!" "Please, mi amor, just for a little while." Emma's expression suggested she knew something important was happening, but she obediently skipped toward the jungle gym, casting curious glances over her shoulder. The silence stretched between David and Isabella like a chasm neither knew how to cross. A jogger passed by, earbuds in, completely oblivious to the world-shifting moment occurring on this ordinary Tuesday morning. Somewhere nearby, a dog barked, and leaves rustled overhead, but David could only hear the thundering of his own heartbeat. "She's beautiful," he said finally, his voice hoarse with emotions he couldn't name. Isabella's composure cracked slightly, and David caught a glimpse of the vulnerability she was fighting to hide. "David, how old is she?" The question came out sharper than he'd intended, but he couldn't help himself. The math was already spinning in his head, calculating dates and possibilities, hope and heartbreak tangling together in his chest. 5. The admission hung in the air between them like a confession. David's breath left him in a rush. 5 years ago. Their divorce had been finalized 6 years ago, but there had been that night, that one impossible, terrible, wonderful night when they'd found each other again, if only briefly. The night Isabella had shown up at his apartment in the rain, tears streaming down her face, saying she'd made a mistake, that she loved him, that maybe they could try again. The night he'd been too proud, too hurt, too afraid to believe her. But they had found each other that night, hadn't they? In his bedroom, with the city lights painting shadows on the walls and years of pain melting away in each other's arms. They'd made love like drowning people gasping for air, desperate and tender and achingly familiar. And then morning had come, along with all their old wounds and stubborn pride, and she'd left without a word. He'd convinced himself it meant nothing, that it was just grief, just two people saying goodbye the only way they knew how. "David," Isabella's voice was trembling now, "I need you to know, is she mine?" The words tore from his throat, raw and desperate. Isabella's silence was answer enough. Emma's laughter carried across the playground as she successfully navigated the monkey bars, calling out, "Mommy, did you see? I made it all the way across!" "I saw, baby," Isabella called back, her voice artificially bright. But when she turned back to David, tears were gathering in her eyes. "I tried to tell you. God, David, I tried so many times." "You tried?" Disbelief and anger warred in his voice. "When? When did you try?" "I called your office. I sent emails. I even came to your building once, but—" She wiped out her eyes with the back of her hand, a gesture so familiar that it made his heart ache. "You made it very clear after that night that you wanted nothing to do with me. Your assistant said you were too busy, that you had moved on, that I should do the same." David's world tilted. Monica. Efficient, protective Monica, who'd been shielding him from distractions for years. How many calls had she screened? How many emails never reached him? "Isabella, I'd never—" He reached toward her instinctively, then stopped himself. "I didn't know. I swear to you, I didn't know." Have you ever discovered a truth that changed everything you thought you knew? Tell us about a moment that shifted your entire perspective. Emma was running back toward them now, her cheeks flushed with excitement and exertion. "Mommy, can we get ice cream? Mrs. Peterson said there's a good truck by the pond." The innocent request shattered the intensity of the moment, reminding them both that they weren't alone in this revelation. David looked down at the little girl, his daughter, his heart whispered, and felt something fundamental shift inside his chest. All the success in the world suddenly felt meaningless compared to this small person he'd never known existed. "What's your name?" he asked Emma, crouching down to her level. "Emma Isabella Martinez," she said proudly. "What's yours?" "David," he said softly. "David Chen." Emma studied his face with the frank assessment of childhood. "You have sad eyes, like Mommy sometimes." The simple, devastating honesty of it nearly broke him. Isabella pulled Emma closer, her protective instincts flaring as she watched David's face cycle through emotions too complex for a 5-year-old to witness. "Emma, sweetheart, go pick out 5 pretty leaves for our collection, okay? The prettiest ones you can find." Emma nodded enthusiastically and bounded away, leaving the adults in a bubble of tension so thick it felt suffocating. "You can't just—" Isabella started, then stopped, struggling to find words that wouldn't shatter the fragile moment. David stood slowly, his hands shaking slightly as he shoved them into his coat pockets. The controlled businessman was reasserting himself, walls slamming back into place with practiced efficiency. 5 years, Isabella. 5 years I've had a daughter and didn't know it. Don't you dare make this about you. Isabella's voice carried an edge of steel that David remembered from their worst fights. You think this was easy for me, raising her alone, watching her ask about her father while knowing— She stopped herself, glancing toward Emma, who was examining leaves with scientific precision. Knowing what? David's voice was dangerously quiet. Isabella's laugh was bitter. Your father was too important, too busy building his empire to return a single phone call. That's not— David ran a hand through his hair, disturbing its perfect styling. You're telling me I have a daughter and I am supposed to just accept that you tried? You're telling me I missed 5 years of her life because of some miscommunication? Miscommunication. Isabella's eyes flashed. Your assistant told me, and I quote, Mr. Chen has moved on with his life and suggests you do the same. He won't be taking any further calls from you." "That's not miscommunication, David. That's a message." The words hit him like a physical blow. Monica had been protecting him, yes, but from what? From the possibility of heartbreak? From the possibility of happiness? His phone buzzed incessantly in his pocket, probably another urgent email, another crisis that required his immediate attention. The irony wasn't lost on him. "I need to think," he said finally, his voice hollow. This changes everything."
"No," Isabella's voice was firm. "Nothing has to change. Emma has a good life. She's happy. She's healthy. She doesn't need what? A father?" The word felt foreign on his tongue, too big and terrifying to fully comprehend. Isabella flinched, as if he'd struck her. "She doesn't need someone who's going to drift in and out of her life whenever it's convenient. She doesn't need to be another item on your agenda. You don't know what kind of father I'd be, don't I?" Isabella's voice was sad now, resigned. "David, we were married for 3 years. I watched you choose work over everything else, over us. I watched you miss dinners, anniversaries, conversations, because there was always something more important happening at the office." The accusation stung because it held truth. How many times had he promised to be home for dinner, only to call at the last minute with an excuse? How many weekends had he spent in the office while Isabella sat alone in their apartment, waiting for a husband who never seemed to have time for the life they'd built together? "That was different," he said weakly. "Was it? Because from where I'm standing, it looks like more of the same." Isabella gestured toward his buzzing phone. "Even now, even in this moment, you're being pulled away." Emma came running back, her small hands full of crimson and gold leaves. "Look, Mommy, I found the most beautiful ones!" She held them up proudly, and David noticed a small scrape on her knee, probably from climbing trees or running too fast. The sight of it made his chest tighten with an unfamiliar protective instinct. "Those are perfect, mi amor," Isabella said, but her voice was strained. Emma looked between them again, her young intuition picking up on the tension. "Are you and the sad man having a fight?" "No, sweetheart, we're just—" "Adults sometimes have difficult conversations," David interrupted, surprising himself by addressing Emma directly. "But we're not fighting." Emma considered this seriously. "My friend Sophie's parents have difficult conversations too. Then they use quiet voices and send her to her room." She paused, studying David's face. "Do you want to see my leaf collection? I have 47 different kinds at home." The simple offer, given with such innocent generosity, nearly undid him. This child, his child, was offering to share her treasures with a stranger. The trust implicit in the gesture made his throat tight. "Isabella," David's voice held a warning, but he was already crouching down to Emma's level again. "I'd like that very much," he said softly. "Maybe someday." "Someday soon?" Emma asked hopefully. Isabella stepped forward quickly. "Emma, we should head home. You have homework and—" "But what about ice cream?" Emma's face fell. "Another day, baby." David watched the disappointment cross his daughter's face and felt something break inside his chest. "I could—" he started, then stopped at Isabella's sharp look. "No," Isabella said firmly. "Emma, say goodbye." Emma dutifully waved, but her confusion was evident. "Will I see you again, Mr. David?" The question hung in the air like a promise and a threat all at once. David looked at Isabella, seeing the fear and determination warring in her expression. She was prepared to walk away, to disappear back into whatever life she'd built without him. The thought terrified him. "I don't know," he answered honestly, and the words felt like failure. As Isabella took Emma's hand and began to walk away, David called out, "Isabella, wait!" She turned back, hope and wariness battling in her eyes. "My number," he said, pulling out his business card, "in case you ever want to talk." Isabella stared at the card for a long moment before taking it. I won't call unless it's about Emma, she said quietly. I understand. But, as he watched them disappear into the crowd of families and joggers and dog walkers, David realized he understood nothing at all. His carefully ordered world had just been turned upside down by a 5-year-old with his eyes and her mother's smile, and he had no idea how to put the pieces back together. His phone buzzed again, insistent and demanding. This time, he turned it off. 3 days passed like a fever dream. David couldn't concentrate on quarterly reports or board meetings. His assistant Monica kept shooting him concerned glances as he stared out his office window, turning Isabella's business card over and over in his hands. He'd memorized every detail: the modest logo for Martinez Translation Services, the address in Queens, the phone number he'd dialed a dozen times without pressing call. On Thursday evening, his world shifted again. The call came at 9:47 p.m. while he was pacing his penthouse, whiskey untouched on the marble counter. Unknown number, but something made him answer. Mr. Chen, the voice was young, panicked. This is Dr. Sarah Winters from Mount Sinai Emergency. You were listed as an emergency contact for Emma Martinez. David's blood turned to ice. What happened? Is she...
She's stable, but she was in an accident. A car ran a red light and hit the crosswalk where she and her mother were crossing. Emma has a concussion and a broken arm. Her mother... The doctor paused. Mrs. Martinez is in surgery. She was more seriously injured. The phone slipped from David's numb fingers, clattering against the floor. When he retrieved it, his hands were shaking so violently he could barely hold it steady. "Sir, are you there?" "I'm coming. I'll be right there." The taxi ride to the hospital passed in a blur of city lights and racing thoughts. When had Isabella listed him as Emma's emergency contact? How long had his name been sitting in some school file, waiting for a moment like this? The pediatric ward was a maze of sterile corridors and hushed voices. David found Emma in room 314, her small form nearly swallowed by the hospital bed. Her left arm was encased in a bright pink cast, and there was a bandage on her forehead, but her eyes were open and alert. "Mr. David?" Her voice was small and confused. "What are you doing here?" David's throat closed. He approached the bed slowly, as if sudden movements might shatter this fragile moment. "I heard you were hurt. I wanted to make sure you were okay." "I fell down and hit my head really hard," Emma said matter-of-factly. "The doctors said I have to stay here tonight to make sure my brain is working right, but I can still count to 100, so I think it's okay." Despite everything, David found himself smiling. "That's very good. What about your arm?" Emma held up her cast proudly. "It's broken, but Dr. Winters said people can sign it with special markers. Do you want to be the first one?" The offer was so innocent, so trusting, that David had to clear his throat before answering. "I'd be honored." A nurse appeared with a basket of colorful markers. David selected a blue one and carefully wrote, "Get well soon, Emma," in his neat handwriting, then added a small heart that looked clumsy compared to his usual precise signature. "That's really good writing," Emma observed. "Mommy says I need to practice my letters more. When she wakes up, I'm going to show her my name on my cast." "When she wakes up." The casual confidence in Emma's voice made David's chest tight. Children, he realized, lived in a world where mothers always woke up, where broken things always got fixed. "Emma," he said carefully, "do you know why I'm here? I mean, how the hospital knew to call me?" Emma nodded seriously. "Mommy put your name on my school papers. She said..." She paused, her brow furrowing as she tried to remember. "She said, sometimes grown-ups need backup people for important things. Are you my backup person?" The simplicity of it hit him like a sledgehammer. He was Emma's backup person. Isabella had trusted him with that role, even when she couldn't trust him with anything else. "I guess I am," he said softly. A doctor appeared in the doorway, young, tired-looking, with kind eyes. "Mr. Chen, I'm Dr. Winters.
Could I speak with you privately?" David's stomach dropped, but he forced a smile for Emma. "I'll be right back, okay? I'm not going anywhere." In the hallway, Dr. Winter's expression was grave. "Mrs. Martinez has internal bleeding. We've managed to stabilize her, but she's going to need extensive surgery and recovery time. Emma can't stay here indefinitely, and she can't go home alone. Is there other family we should contact?" David's mind raced. What about Isabella's parents? According to our records, both her parents are deceased. There's a sister listed, but she's currently deployed overseas with the military. You're literally the only emergency contact we have. The weight of responsibility settled on David's shoulders like a mantle he never expected to wear. What does that mean exactly? It means Emma needs somewhere to stay while her mother recovers, potentially several weeks. Child services will need to get involved unless there's a family member willing to take temporary custody. David looked back through the open door at Emma, who was examining her cast with intense concentration. His daughter. His responsibility. The child he'd never known existed 3 days ago was now depending on him for everything. What would that involve? The temporary custody. Dr. Winters pulled out a clipboard thick with forms. Background checks, home visits, proof of financial stability, but given that you're listed as her emergency contact and you're obviously financially capable, she gestured towards his expensive suit, it could be expedited. The question is whether you're prepared for that kind of commitment. David thought about his sterile penthouse apartment with its white furniture and sharp edges, not a single child-safe corner in sight. He thought about his 17-hour workdays, his business trips, and his complete lack of experience with children. Then he thought about Emma asking him if he wanted to see her leaf collection, about her gap-toothed smile, and the way she'd called him her backup person. What do I need to sign? Sometimes life forces us into roles we never expected. Have you ever had to step up in a way that completely changed your perspective? Share your story below. 2 hours later, David found himself back in Emma's room with a stack of paperwork and a head spinning with instructions about bedtimes and dietary restrictions and emergency procedures. Emma had finally fallen asleep, her small hand curled around the stuffed animal the nurses had given her. He sat in the uncomfortable visitor's chair, watching the rise and fall of her chest, and wondered what the hell he'd gotten himself into. Tomorrow, he'd have to child-proof his apartment. He'd have to learn about cartoon preferences and homework schedules and whatever 5-year-olds ate for breakfast. He'd have to become a father, ready or not.
David's penthouse had never felt more like a museum than it did with Emma curled up on his Italian leather sofa, her pink cast bright against the monochrome decor. It had been 3 days since he'd brought her home from the hospital, 3 days of awkward breakfast conversations and emergency trips to buy child-appropriate food. His housekeeper, Mrs. Chin, had taken one look at Emma and immediately begun Emma-proofing the apartment, with the efficiency of a woman who'd raised 6 children of her own. "She needs color," Mrs. Chin had declared, returning from her shopping expedition with armfuls of pillows, blankets, and what appeared to be an entire toy store. "Children cannot live in a place that looks like a fancy hotel." Now David sat on his terrace, laptop balanced on his knees, trying to work while keeping one ear tuned to Emma's quiet humming from inside. She was coloring, an activity that apparently required intense concentration and occasional consultation with him about whether flowers could be purple or if dragons were real. His phone rang and he nearly dropped the laptop in his haste to answer. Isabella's name on the screen made his heart race. "David?" Her voice was weak but alert. "Isabella, how are you feeling? Is Emma okay? The nurses won't tell me much and I've been going crazy." "She's fine. She's here with me. David looked through the glass doors at Emma, who was now having an animated conversation with one of her new stuffed animals. "She's incredible." A long pause. "I need to see her." "The doctors said you need to rest. Emma and I can come tomorrow." "No." Isabella's voice was firm, despite its weakness. "I need to see her now. And David, we need to talk, really talk, about everything."
2 hours later, David stood in the hospital elevator with Emma bouncing excitedly beside him, clutching a crayon drawing she'd made for her mother. The elevator doors opened on the 4th floor, and Emma raced down the hallway with the confidence of a child who spent too much time in hospitals recently. Isabella was sitting up in bed when they entered, her face pale but her eyes bright with relief. Emma launched herself carefully into her mother's arms, and David had to look away from the raw emotion on Isabella's face as she held her daughter. "I missed you so much, mi amor," Isabella whispered, tears streaming down her cheeks. "I missed you too, Mommy. Look!" Emma held up her cast, now covered in colorful signatures and drawings. Mr. David was the first one to sign it, and Mrs. Chen drew a butterfly, and the nice nurse drew a rainbow. Isabella's eyes met David's over Emma's head, and he saw something there that looked like gratitude mixed with fear. After Emma had exhausted herself telling her mother every detail of the past 3 days, she curled up in the visitor's chair and promptly fell asleep, emotionally drained. "Thank you," Isabella said quietly. "I know this isn't what you signed up for." David moved closer to her bed, his voice equally quiet. "Actually, I think it's exactly what I signed up for. 6 years too late, but—" Isabella's laugh was soft and sad. "You were always terrible at timing." "Isabella, I need to understand something. The emergency contact thing. When did you do that?" Isabella looked down at her hands, picking at the hospital blanket. "Right after Emma started school. The forms required 2 emergency contacts, and She took a shaky breath. "I put down my sister first, but she was already deployed. I stared at that second line for an hour." "Why me, after everything that happened between us?" Isabella was quiet for so long that David thought she might not answer. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely a whisper. "Because despite everything, despite how badly we hurt each other, you were the one person I knew would move heaven and earth to keep her safe if something happened to me." The words hit him like a physical blow. "Isabella, do you remember our last anniversary, the one we never celebrated?" I closed my eyes. Of course I remembered. It had been the beginning of the end for us. "You promised you'd be home by 7, Isabella continued, her voice growing stronger. "I spent all day cooking your favorite meal. I bought a new dress, that blue one you always said you loved. I had news, David, important news." I snapped my eyes open. "What news?" Isabella's smile was heartbreaking. "I was pregnant." The word hung in the air between us like a confession that changed everything. I felt the world tilt beneath me. "You were pregnant? 6 years ago?" 8 weeks along. I was so scared, so excited. I had the ultrasound picture in my purse, and I'd practiced how to tell you 100 times. But you didn't come home at 7, or 8, or 9. I remembered that night with painful clarity now. A last-minute crisis with a merger, a conference call that ran hours longer than expected. I'd walked into our apartment at nearly midnight to find the dining room table still set for 2, candles burned down to stubs, and Isabella curled up on the couch in her blue dress, mascara streaked down her cheeks. "You were so angry," I said quietly. "I wasn't angry, David. I was heartbroken. I'd been sitting there for hours imagining telling you about the baby, picturing your face when you realized you were going to be a father. Instead, I got another night of cold dinner and empty promises." "Why didn't you tell me then, when I got home?" Isabella's laugh was bitter. "Because you walked in talking about the merger, about how this deal was going to change everything, how we'd finally have the security we needed. You were so proud of yourself for closing it. I couldn't compete with that. Isabella, if I had known, would it have mattered? Really?" Her eyes searched his face. "Because 2 weeks later, I lost the baby, miscarriage, and you were in Tokyo on business." The words hit him like a sledgehammer. David sank into the chair beside her bed, his legs suddenly unable to support him. "You lost? God, Isabella, why didn't you call me? Why didn't you—" "I did call you.
I called you sobbing from the hospital, and you asked if it could wait because you were in the middle of negotiations." Isabella's voice was steady now, but tears were streaming down her face. "Your exact words were, 'Can this wait, Bella? I'm about to close the biggest deal of my career.'" David remembered the call. He remembered being annoyed at the interruption, remembered Isabella crying about something he'd assumed was trivial, remembered promising to call her back and then forgetting in the rush of success and champagne toasts. "I thought you were calling about something small. I thought—" "I know what you thought. That's the problem. You always thought my world was smaller than yours, less important." They sat in silence, the weight of all their unspoken history settling between them like a stone. Emma stirred in her chair but didn't wake, and David found himself looking at her with new eyes. She was Isabella's second chance, the child she'd carried and raised alone while he built his empire of glass and steel. "Is that why you left?" Isabella nodded. "I couldn't stay in a marriage where I was always competing with your work and losing. I couldn't risk putting another child through that. So when Emma came along—" "You decided I didn't deserve to know?" "I decided she deserved better than a part-time father who might disappoint her the way you disappointed me." The words were harsh but fair, and David accepted them like the punishment he knew he deserved. But as he looked at Emma sleeping peacefully in the chair, her small hand still clutching the drawing she'd made for her mother, he felt something shift inside him, a resolve that had nothing to do with business deals or profit margins. "I want to be better," he said quietly. "For her, for both of you, if you'll let me try." Isabella studied his face for a long moment, searching for something she'd lost faith in years ago. "People don't change that easily, David, not even for love." "Then I guess we'll find out, won't we?" Isabella came home on a Thursday that felt like the first day of spring, even though November frost still painted the windows of David's penthouse. She moved slowly, still favoring her left side where the surgeries had left their mark, but her eyes were bright with relief at being reunited with Emma properly. "Mommy, look what we did!" Emma grabbed Isabella's hand the moment she walked through the door, carefully leading her to what had once been David's pristine home office. The room had been transformed into something that looked like a cross between an art studio and a kindergarten classroom. "Mr. David said I could use his big desk for projects." Isabella stared in amazement at the chaos of creativity that had overtaken the space where David used to conduct million-dollar video conferences. Finger paintings covered the walls, building blocks created elaborate cities across the floor, and David's expensive leather chair had been repurposed as a fort using blankets and pillows. "He said we could paint the walls if we wanted to," Emma continued excitedly, "but I told him we should ask you first because it's polite." David appeared in the doorway, looking slightly embarrassed. His usual perfectly pressed shirt was wrinkled, and there was what appeared to be glue in his hair. "She's been creative," he said with a smile that Isabella had never seen before, unguarded, genuinely happy. "I can see that." Isabella's voice was soft with wonder. "David, you didn't have to." "Actually, I did." He stepped into the room, careful not to disturb Emma's block city. "Turns out 5-year-olds don't particularly care about quarterly reports or stock projections. They care about whether you know the difference between a brontosaurus and a triceratops." "Do you?" Isabella asked, fighting back a smile. "I do now. Emma's been very thorough in my education." The easy banter felt strange and familiar at all once, like slipping into an old song you'd forgotten you knew. Isabella found herself remembering why she'd fallen in love with David in the first place. Not the CEO in the expensive suits, but the young man who used to make her laugh until her sides hurt, who would spend entire Sunday mornings in bed reading the paper aloud and debating politics. "Can we make pancakes for dinner?" Emma asked suddenly. "Mr. David said we could have breakfast food for dinner if you said it was okay." Isabella looked at David questioningly. "Pancakes?" "Emergency grocery shopping," he admitted. "Turns out my usual diet of takeout and protein bars doesn't really work for children. We've been experimenting." "He makes terrible pancakes," she confided to her mother in a stage whisper. "But he tries really hard, and he doesn't get mad when I spill syrup." Something about the casual way Emma talked about David, the acceptance, the affection that had grown in just a week made Isabella's chest tight with emotion. She'd been so afraid of him disappointing Emma, but looking at them now, seeing the ease they moved around each other, she realized that fear might have been misplaced. "Pancakes sound perfect," she said. An hour later, the three of them sat around David's glass dining table, a table that had never seen anything more casual than catered business dinners, eating slightly lumpy pancakes and laughing at Emma's elaborate stories about her stuffed animals' adventures. David had loosened his tie and rolled up his sleeves, and Isabella caught herself staring at the way he listened to Emma with complete attention, as if her tale of a brave rabbit saving a kingdom was the most important presentation he'd ever heard.
And then Princess Bunny had to make a really hard choice, Emma was saying, syrup dripping from her fork as she gestured dramatically. She could save the magic flowers, or she could save the people in the village, but she couldn't do both. What did she do? David asked seriously. She got really smart and figured out how to do both, Emma announced triumphantly. Sometimes grown-ups think there's only one answer, but kids know there's always more ways to fix things. Isabella and David's eyes met across the table, and she saw the same thought reflected in his gaze, out of the mouths of babes. After dinner, Emma insisted on showing Isabella how David had been reading to her before bed. "He does all the voices," she explained, climbing onto the couch between them with her favorite book. "He makes the dragon sound really scary, but not too scary." David looked mortified. "I'm not very good at—" "You're perfect," Emma interrupted matter-of-factly, settling against his side with the trust that only children possess. "Mommy, you sit on my other side so we can all read together." Isabella hesitated for just a moment, then settled onto the couch. She was close enough to catch David's scent, expensive cologne mixed with something warmer, more human than she remembered. When Emma insisted they all hold the book together, Isabella's hand brushed David's, and she didn't pull away. David's voice as he read was different than she'd ever heard it, gentler, more animated. He really did do all the voices, transforming from brave knight to wicked witch to wise owl, with theatrical flair that made Emma giggle. Isabella found herself watching his face more than the book, noting the way his eyes crinkled when Emma laughed, the careful way he turned each page so she could see the pictures clearly. "This is nice," Emma said sleepily as the story ended. "Like a real family." The words hung in the air like a wish and a question all at once. Isabella felt David go very still beside her, and she knew he was feeling the same fragile hope that was blooming in her chest, dangerous and wonderful and terrifying. "Come on, mi amor," Isabella said softly. "Time for bed." David surprised them both by standing up. "I'll tuck you in," he said to Emma, "if that's okay." Emma nodded enthusiastically, taking both their hands and leading them to what had become her room, David's former guest room, now decorated with the drawings she'd made and stuffed animals that seemed to multiply daily. As they stood together in the doorway watching Emma settle into bed with her favorite rabbit, Isabella felt something she hadn't experienced in years, the sense of being part of something bigger than herself, not just a mother and daughter surviving on their own, but a family, imperfect and uncertain, but real. "Thank you," she whispered to David as they turned off the lights. "For what?" "For trying, for being here, for—" She gestured helplessly, unable to find words for the transformation she'd witnessed, "for becoming the man I always hoped you could be." David's hand found hers in the dim hallway, his fingers intertwining with hers like they belonged there. "I'm still learning," he said quietly, "but, Isabella, I've never wanted anything more than I want to get this right." For the first time in years, Isabella believed him. The call came at 6:23 p.m. on a Tuesday that started like all the others, with Emma's laughter echoing through the penthouse and the scent of Isabella's coffee filling the kitchen. David was in his office trying to balance a conference call with Tokyo while keeping one eye on Emma, who was coloring quietly at the small table he'd had installed just for her. "Mr. Chen?" His assistant Monica's voice cut through the speakerphone. "I'm sorry to interrupt, but there's an urgent matter that requires your immediate attention." David glanced at Emma, who was completely absorbed in her artwork. In the kitchen, he could hear Isabella humming softly as she prepared dinner, something with garlic and herbs that made the penthouse smell like a real home for the first time in years. "Tell them I'll be there Thursday," he said quietly. After he ended the call, David sat in the silence of his office, staring at the family photo Emma had drawn and taped to his computer monitor. It showed 3 stick figures holding hands in front of a house with a crooked roof and too many windows. Daddy, Mommy, and Emma, written in her careful 5-year-old handwriting. When had he started thinking of himself as Daddy? Isabella appeared in the doorway, concern creasing her brow. "Everything okay? You look like you've seen a ghost." "I have to go to Tokyo," he said, the words feeling like stones in his mouth. "Thursday, for at least a week, maybe 2. Isabella's face went very still. "The merger you've been working on?" He nodded, unable to meet her eyes. "If I don't go, the deal falls through. 2 years of work, $3 billion, hundreds of jobs." "I understand." Her voice was carefully neutral, but David could hear the hurt underneath. "No, you don't understand." David stood up, frustration making his voice sharper than he intended. "This isn't just about money. This is about my company, my father's legacy, everything I've built."
Everything you've built. Isabella's repetition was quiet but loaded with years of accumulated pain. Not everything we've built, not the family we've been trying to create here, just the company. Isabella, that's not fair, isn't it? She stepped fully into the room, her dark eyes flashing with anger and disappointment. 3 weeks, David. 3 weeks of bedtime stories and pancake breakfasts, and me foolishly thinking that maybe this time would be different. But here we are again. Emma appeared behind Isabella, her drawing clutched in her small hands. "Mommy, why are you and Daddy talking in loud voices?" The word Daddy hit David like a physical blow. When had Emma started calling him that? When had he stopped correcting her? "We're just having a grown-up conversation, mi amor," Isabella said, but her voice was strained. "Are you going away, Daddy?" Emma asked, her lower lip trembling slightly, like Sophie's daddy did when their parents got divorced. The innocent question shattered something inside David's chest. He knelt down to Emma's level, trying to find words that wouldn't break her heart. "I have to go on a business trip, sweetheart, but I'll come back." "When?" I don't know exactly, but I promise I'll come back." Emma's face crumpled. "But you just got here. I didn't even finish teaching you about dinosaurs yet." Isabella moved protectively closer to Emma, and David saw something close in her expression, the same shuttered look she'd worn during their divorce proceedings. "Emma, why don't you go wash your hands for dinner?" Isabella said gently. After Emma left, the silence between them felt like a chasm. "I don't have a choice," David said finally. "You always have a choice," Isabella replied. "You just consistently choose work over family, over us." This is different. This is my responsibility." "What about your responsibility to Emma, to us?" Isabella's voice broke slightly. "She's been telling everyone at school about her daddy. She drew a picture of our family for show and tell. She asked me yesterday if you were going to live with us forever." Each word was a knife to his heart, but David forced himself to stay focused on the bigger picture. This deal will secure her future, our future, the money from this merger. "Stop." Isabella held up her hand. "Just stop. I don't want to hear about money or security or the future. I want to know if you're capable of choosing your daughter over a boardroom. I want to know if you've actually changed at all, or if these past 3 weeks have just been you playing house until something more important came along. You're being unfair. Am I? Because from where I'm standing, this looks exactly like every other time you've chosen work over the people who love you. Like our anniversary, like when I lost the baby, like every single time I needed you and you weren't there. The accusation hung between them like a lit fuse. David felt his own anger rising, the familiar defensive walls slamming back into place. I'm trying to provide for my family, he said coldly. I'm trying to build something that will last, something that will take care of you and Emma long after I'm gone. But apparently that doesn't matter to you. Building something that will last? Isabella's laugh was bitter. You want to know what lasts, David? Memories, trust, being there when the people you love need you. But you don't understand that, do you? You think everything can be bought or negotiated or delayed until it's convenient for your schedule. That's not true, isn't it? When was the last time you told Emma you loved her without checking your phone? When was the last time you had a conversation with me that wasn't interrupted by work? You're already halfway out the door and you haven't even left yet. David opened his mouth to argue, then stopped. His phone was buzzing in his pocket, probably Monica with more urgent details about the Tokyo trip. The irony wasn't lost on him. I have to take this deal, he said quietly. Isabella nodded, but her eyes were filling with tears. I know you do, and that's exactly the problem. Emma's voice carried from the kitchen. Mommy, Daddy Dimmer's ready. But as they stood there in the wreckage of their fragile new beginning, dinner felt like the last thing either of them could stomach. We should pack, Isabella said finally, her voice hollow. Emma and I should go home tonight. Isabella, please. No, David, we both know how this ends. I won't put Emma through watching you choose work over her again. I won't put myself through it either. As Isabella turned to leave, David felt his world cracking apart like glass, but he couldn't bring himself to say the words that might stop her, couldn't promise something he wasn't sure he could keep. His phone buzzed again. This time he answered it. The Tokyo hotel suite was everything David had requested. Corner view, marble bathroom, premium internet for video conferences. It was also the most luxurious prison he'd ever inhabited. He stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows, watching the city lights blur through rain that had been falling steadily for 2 days, and felt nothing but emptiness. The merger negotiations weren't going well. Despite his presence, despite his perfectly prepared presentations and carefully researched cultural gestures, the Nakamura executives remained cold and distant. Something fundamental was missing from his performance. The passion, the fire that had driven every successful deal of his career. He was going through the motions like an actor who'd forgotten why he'd wanted to be on stage in the first place. His phone sat silent on the mahogany desk, mocking him. He'd called Isabella's number 17 times since arriving in Tokyo 3 days ago. It went straight to voicemail every time. He'd tried texting, emailing, even calling the hospital to check on her recovery. But she'd made it clear she wanted no contact with him. The last message he left was pathetic. Please, Isabella, just let me talk to Emma. Let me explain. No response. A soft knock at the door interrupted his brooding. Come in, he called, expecting room service or perhaps his assistant with more bad news about the negotiations. Instead, an elderly Japanese woman entered, bowing politely. She wore the simple uniform of hotel housekeeping, but something about her presence commanded attention. Mr. Chen-san, she said. Her English was careful but clear. I am Tanaka-san. I have been cleaning your room. David nodded politely, confused about why housekeeping needed to speak to him directly. I could not help but notice, she continued,
gesturing toward his desk, where numerous photos of Emma were scattered alongside business documents. "These pictures of little girl, very beautiful child." "Yes," David said softly. "My daughter." "Ah," Tanaka-san's face brightened. "You are proud father, I see. She has your eyes." David's throat tightened. "She does." "May I ask, where is this beautiful daughter now?" The innocent question hit David like a punch to the gut. "In New York, with my mother." Tanaka-san studied his face with the wisdom of someone who'd raised children and watched life unfold in all its complexity. "But you are here." "I'm here for work, an important business deal." "Ah," she nodded thoughtfully, then began arranging the scattered photos into a neat pile. "My husband was businessman too, very important man, always traveling for work, always very busy." David found himself drawn into the conversation despite himself. "Was?" he said. "He died 5 years ago, a heart attack in hotel room in London. Very successful man, made much money, built big company. But you know what he told me before he died?" David shook his head. "He said he wished he had spent more time watching our children grow up. He said all the money in the world could not buy back the moments he missed." She picked up one of Emma's photos, the one where she was grinning with her gap-toothed smile, chocolate ice cream smeared on her chin. "This little girl, she will not be 5 years old forever, Chen-san." The words settled over David like a weight he'd been carrying without realizing it. Tanaka-san bowed politely and moved toward the door, then paused. "My grandson, he is 5 years old now. You know what his favorite thing is?" "What?" "When his father reads him bedtime stories. Not expensive toys, not fancy trips, just his father's voice, just his father's time." She smiled sadly. "Time is only gift that truly matters, Chen-san. Everything else can be replaced." After she left, David stood alone in the silence, staring at Emma's photos. He thought about the way she'd curled up against him during story time, the trust in her voice when she called him Daddy, the drawing she'd made of their family that he'd carried to Tokyo in his briefcase like a talisman. His phone rang. Monica. "David, I have good news and bad news about the Nakamura situation." "Bad news first." "They're definitely walking away. Hoffman made them a better offer, and frankly, they don't think your heart is in this anymore." David should have felt devastated. 2 years of work, billions of dollars, his father's legacy, all of it crumbling. Instead, he felt something unexpected. Relief. "What's the good news?" "Actually, there isn't any. I just thought it would sound better if I said there was." "David, are you okay? You don't sound like someone who just lost the biggest deal of his career."
David looked at Emma's photos again, then at his reflection in the rain-streaked window. For the first time in years, he saw clearly who he'd become and who he wanted to be. "Monica, I need you to book me on the next flight to New York." "David, there might still be a way to salvage this. If we approach the Nakamura group through different channels—" "No." The word came out stronger than he'd expected. "Book the flight, cancel all my meetings. And Monica?" "Yes?" "Draft a letter to the board. I'm taking a leave of absence, indefinite." The silence on the other end of the line was deafening. "David, you can't be serious. The company needs you. The shareholders." "The company will survive. It has before." David was already moving toward his suitcase, his movements suddenly urgent. "But my daughter won't be 5 forever, and I've already missed too much." "David." "Monica, how many children do you have?" 3, she said quietly. "Do you remember their first words, first steps, first day of school?" "Of course." "I don't remember any of that with Emma because I wasn't there. I can't get those moments back,
but I might still have a chance for the rest of them. David was throwing clothes into his suitcase now, energized by a sense of purpose he hadn't felt in years. "Book the flight, Monica, the earliest one you can find." As he packed, David found the drawing Emma had made, their little stick figure family with their crooked house and too many windows. At the bottom, in her careful kindergarten handwriting, she'd written, "I love you, Daddy." For the first time since arriving in Tokyo, David smiled. Some deals were worth losing if it meant winning back what truly mattered. He had a family to fight for. The rain in New York was different from Tokyo, softer, warmer, like the city itself was welcoming him home. David stood outside Isabella's apartment building in Queens at 7:23 a.m., his expensive suit wrinkled from the 14-hour flight, his hair disheveled, and his heart hammering against his ribs like a caged bird. He'd been standing there for 20 minutes, watching lights flicker on in windows as the neighborhood came to life, trying to find the courage to ring the buzzer. Through a first-floor window, he could see an elderly woman watering plants on her fire escape, humming softly to herself. The scene was so peacefully domestic, so different from his sterile penthouse world, that it made his chest ache with longing. A familiar giggle from above made him look up. There, on the third-floor fire escape, was Emma in purple pajamas decorated with dinosaurs, carefully tending to a small garden of potted flowers. Isabella sat beside her, in a worn terrycloth robe, helping Emma measure water into a tiny watering can. "Remember, mi amor, not too much water, or the flowers will get sick," Emma asked seriously. "Like how people get sick if they eat too much ice cream?" Exactly like that. David found himself smiling despite his nerves. This was his family, not the sanitized, perfect version he'd imagined in boardrooms and business plans, but the real, messy, beautiful truth of it. Emma with bedhead and morning breath. Isabella without makeup, both of them completely focused on nurturing something small and fragile into bloom. He pulled out his phone and dialed Isabella's number, watching through the window as she frowned at her buzzing phone, probably ready to decline yet another call from him. But this time she answered. "David?" "Look down." He watched her lean over the fire escape railing, her eyes widening when she spotted him on the sidewalk below. Even from 3 stories up, he could see the conflict playing across her face: surprise, hurt, hope, and something that might have been love if he was lucky enough to deserve it. "What are you doing here? Aren't you supposed to be in Tokyo, closing your big deal?" I did. I lost it. I lost the deal, Isabella. $3 billion, 2 years of work, all of it, gone." A long pause. "I'm sorry," she said quietly, and he could hear that she meant it despite everything between them. "I'm not." The admission surprised him with its truth. "I'm not sorry at all." Emma had noticed him now, waving enthusiastically from the fire escape. "Daddy, you came back! Mommy, Daddy came back!" Isabella's intake of breath was audible through the phone. "David, can I come up? Please? I have something I need to say, and I'd rather not shout it from the street." 5 minutes later, David stood in Isabella's small living room, taking in details he'd never noticed during Emma's brief illness-induced stay at his penthouse. Family photos covered every surface. Emma's first day of school, birthday parties with friends whose names he didn't know, quiet moments between mother and daughter that spoke of years of shared love and inside jokes. This was the life Isabella had built without him, and it was beautiful in ways his wealth had never been able to purchase. Emma, with bedhead and morning breath, launched herself into his arms the moment he walked through the door, chattering excitedly about her flower garden and a loose tooth and a book about dragons she'd checked out from the library. David held her tight, breathing in the scent of children's shampoo and morning sunshine, feeling pieces of his heart click back into place.
"I missed you, Daddy," Emma said simply, and the words nearly undid him. "I missed you too, sweetheart, more than you'll ever know." Isabella stood in the kitchen doorway, her arms crossed defensively, but her eyes soft as she watched them together. "Emma, why don't you go get dressed? We need to leave for school soon." After Emma skipped away to her bedroom, the silence stretched between David and Isabella like a bridge neither was sure how to cross. "You lost the deal," Isabella said finally. It wasn't a question. "I walked away from it." David sat heavily on her couch, a comfortable, well-worn piece that probably cost less than his monthly dry-cleaning bill, but felt more like home than anything in his penthouse. "I was sitting in this hotel room in Tokyo, looking at pictures of Emma, and I realized I was about to make the same mistake I've been making my entire life." "David—" "No, let me finish, please." He looked up at her, seeing past the defensive posture to the woman who'd loved him enough to marry him, who'd trusted him enough to put his name on their daughter's emergency contact forms, who'd been brave enough to hope he could change. "I've spent my whole life thinking that success meant building something bigger, earning something more, achieving something that would last forever. But sitting in that hotel room, I realized that I already had something that could last forever, and I was about to lose it for the second time." Isabella's arms dropped to her sides. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying that I choose you, both of you. I choose bedtime stories over board meetings. I choose Emma's school plays over merger negotiations. I choose this," he gestured around the small, warm apartment, "over everything else I thought I wanted." Tears were gathering in Isabella's eyes. "People don't just change, David. Not overnight. Not because of one grand gesture." "You're right." David stood up, moving closer to her, but stopping just out of reach. "Which is why I'm not asking you to trust me based on words. I'm asking you to let me prove it, every day, for as long as it takes." "And your company? Your father's legacy?" David smiled, thinking of the conversation he'd had with his board of directors from the Tokyo airport. "The company will survive. It has good people, strong leadership. As for my father's legacy," he paused, remembering the elderly Japanese woman's words about time being the only gift that truly mattered. "I think my father would understand that some things are more important than business." Emma appeared in the doorway, backpack slung over her shoulder and gap-toothed grin blazing. "Are you coming to school with us, Daddy? I want to show you my classroom." David looked at Isabella, the question clear in his eyes. She studied his face for a long moment, searching for something she'd lost faith in years ago. Whatever she saw there must have satisfied her, because she nodded slowly. "Get your coat," she said softly. "We don't want to be late." As they walked to Emma's school, Emma chattering between them, holding both their hands, completely oblivious to the momentous nature of the moment, David felt something he'd never experienced in any boardroom: complete and utter peace. They paused at the crosswalk where Emma had been hit just weeks ago, the memory still fresh and frightening. But today, with his family safe beside him and his priorities finally clear, David felt only gratitude. Sometimes he realized the worst moments in life were actually doorways to the best ones. "Daddy," Emma said as they reached the school gates, "are you going to live with us now, like a real family?" David looked at Isabella, seeing his own hope reflected in her eyes. "If your mommy says it's okay, I'd like that very much." Isabella's smile was radiant as sunlight. "I think we can work something out." As Emma ran into school, turning back to wave at them through the window, David pulled Isabella into his arms. She fit against him perfectly, like she always had, like she always would. "I love you," he whispered against her hair. "I love both of you, and I promise, Isabella, no more choosing work over family. No more missed dinners or forgotten anniversaries. No more being too busy for the people who matter most." "I love you too," she whispered back. "I never stopped." They stood there on the sidewalk, holding each other as parents and children streamed around them, and David realized that he'd finally closed the most important deal of his life. Not for billions of dollars or corporate legacy, but for something infinitely more valuable.
a second chance at love, at family, at the kind of success that couldn't be measured in quarterly reports. In the distance, Emma waved at them from her classroom window, her face pressed against the glass, her breath fogging it up as she drew a heart with her finger. David waved back, his own heart finally, completely, home.
What did you think of David's journey from CEO to devoted father? Have you ever had to choose between career success and family happiness? Share your thoughts and experiences in the comments below. Thank you for joining this journey of discovery, redemption, and the bridges we build to connect across the divides that separate us. Share your thoughts about second chances and the hidden gifts of the people around us. We'd love to hear your stories of unexpected connections that changed everything. Please like, subscribe, and share, because every story of choosing love over fear matters.